The Southern California coast has many different ecological areas of interest for a potential study to be done on. From the kelp forests of Monterey Bay to the sandy beaches of Pismo, there are many unique environments to immerse yourself into. One of the most fun and least labor-intensive environments to explore are tide pools. Laguna Beach offers everything in terms of a beach town, including a diverse array of life in their tide pools. The tide pools arranged directly south of downtown offer everything you need for a good day of tide pooling. The tide pools themselves are rocky, usually coated with a decent layer of algae. These algal blooms are observable pretty much anywhere around the area. The tide pools themselves are very diverse areas. There are organisms here that can withstand being outside the water for days, and some that will die within minutes. A good tool to fully illustrate the amount of variety of life that can be found in tide pools can be found in their different zones, classified by how much water they receive. Up highest is the splash zone, which receives the least amount of water. Organisms like periwinkles, limpets, and short crabs can be found here. The next layer down is the high tide zone, which receives water coverage during the highest tides. It is the first layer of the intertidal zone. You can usually find more mussels, hermit crabs, some aggregating anemones, and marine snails here. The following layer is the mid-tide zone, which is covered and uncovered twice a day. Following this is the low tide zone, which is only exposed during the lowest of tides. Here you can find sea stars, solitary anemones, nudibranchs, and other organisms which wouldn't usually come out of the water. The community characteristic here is that these organisms live based off of their evolutionary adaptations, with their livelihoods based on their ability to withstand changes in temperature, salinity, wave action, and their overall resistance to desiccation. Other physical and biological factors that have a play in the tide pools include the tide and water levels, the temperature of the water, and the air, salinity, overall wave action, the oxygen in the water, and the substrate that surrounds the tide pools, whether it be rocky, sandy, or muddy. Most of the biological factors come down to competition, predation by other organisms, and possibly by the same species, the resource availability in the given area, and the overall human impact that can occur, whether it be through pollution or direct destruction of the tide pool areas.
Did you ever see a whale with a polka dot tail?
Now that we understand the fundamental differences of the environments that these organisms live and thrive in, we can begin to take a look at the individual species themselves. Starting in the high tide zone, where a lot of barnacles and mussels can be found. The first interaction that is incredibly notable is the competition for space. The limited amount of hard rocky substrate in a given area gives both of these organisms a hard ceiling in terms of their population numbers. Another interaction between these barnacles and mussels with other organisms and phyla involves them and echinoderms, in which case the mussels and barnacles will try to move a bit further down in elevation, but when they get under the water, the sea stars and urchins will tear them apart, which forces them to congregate in the higher tide zone. Another interesting interaction between echinoderms and other organisms of the tide pool include their interactions with kelp. This is the holdfast of a kelp, which urchins will come through and devour, essentially uprooting the kelp and allowing it to wash up on shore, which is probably what happened to this one here. Wave action also plays a part in the destruction of kelp, but it really does not take long for the numbers to really come back, unlike the urchins, which can devastate populations for years or even decades, depending on the amount of predators in the area. A profile on Laguna Beach tide pools would not be complete without a little section on sandcastle worms. In the high tide zone, you have mainly mussels and barnacles, but the second you get to the mid-tide zone, it is all sandcastle worms. Before I made my trip to the tide pools to cover the video, I had no idea what these were. When I saw them, I had no idea what they were. But they're actually very interesting because they have a lot of different interactions with other organisms in the area, including the fact that they create habitats for invertebrates. They alter the wave motion of the incoming waves because they create big rock-like structures. It offers a source of food for a lot of other organisms in the sea. And they have this very, very interesting, not completely unlike barnacle and mussels, the cementation process where they create this glue using the sediment in the sea. On the topic of organisms with major populations in the Laguna tide pools, I would be remiss if I did not mention anything about hermit crabs. Hermit crabs were, besides anything sessile, probably the most abundant organism that I saw on both of my trips. A big factor of this seems to be a pipeline running through a lower elevation side of the tide pool where a lot of organisms have made a habitat out of it. Because of its hard substrate, you'll see a lot of things attaching to it, a lot of algae, a lot of mussels, a lot of barnacles. But more than else, it is the hermit crabs. Now, notably with these hermit crabs, they're populated in the same area as anemones most of the time, and there's a lot of mutualism that goes on there. Sometimes the anemones will attach themselves onto the hermit crab shells themselves in order for them to hitch a free ride, and allows them to gain more food and reduce competition from other anemones. Now, these anemones also prey on the hermit crabs, offering them a great source of food. But it is possible for the hermit crabs to chill in the middle of the anemones and use it as protection. One of the reasons why hermit crabs might be so prevalent in the Laguna tide pools might be based off of their roles as scavengers, allowing them to eat pretty much anything. That and the fact that they are extremely adapted for the tide pools. The only real issues that they face is the prevalence of other predators in the area, the limited amount of shell availability, and the overall environmental stresses that are placed on them, whether it be desiccation, temperature fluctuations, or wave action. One organism that offers a bit of a debate in terms of whether it belongs to the tide pool or the coast in general are whimbrels. Now, these are coastal foragers, so they'll feed from anywhere to sandy shores to the tide pools. Their adaptations include a long, curved bill, which is used for probing in the sand, which allows them to easily extract buried prey like worms or crabs. They have long legs, which allow them to wade in shallow tide pools, great vision, and are overall scavengers, so they'll eat whatever's available. They don't have a favorite. Here you can see them probing through the sand, and there's another clip where they're more in a tide pool area. Now, these birds mainly eat invertebrates, whether it be crabs, worms, anything of that size. The organizations working to keep Laguna Beach tide pools ecologically sound include the Laguna Ocean Foundation, whose mission is to preserve and protect the intertidal and marine environments of Laguna Beach. They often have the Tide Pool Educator Program active, which places trained volunteers at tide pools to educate visitors about responsible behavior and tide pool ecology. Their focus areas are visitor education and conservation of sensitive habitats. The Laguna Bluebelt Coalition advocates for the protection and restoration of Laguna Beach's marine ecosystem, including the tide pools. Their activities mainly include working to expand and enforce protections of Laguna Beach's MPAs, which are Marine Protected Areas. Their focus areas are advocacy for stricter protections and community-driven conservation efforts. There are also organizations that are less geographically focused that also help out the area. This includes the Crystal Cove Conservancy, the Marine Protected Areas Collaborative Network as a whole, and the Ocean Institute, which regularly does educational programs to encourage public outreach. Good websites to find more information about Laguna Beach tide pools include visit lagunabeach.com, lagunabeachcity.net, and lagunaoceanfoundation.org, all of which offer great materials about different facets of tide pool life.